Jungles swallowing pyramids, glyphs naming kings, and the dates drums went quiet. The Maya built cities of math and starlight. Why did many fall silent? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are decoding one of history's greatest demographic mysteries, the widespread abandonment of the southern Maya lowlands around the 9th century AD. The goal isn't just to find one simple cause, but to understand the complicated political and environmental restructuring that allowed these magnificent court cities to just empty out.
Right. And when you look at the Maya civilization, you're looking at a huge swath of time and space across modern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Central America. Importantly, this wasn't one unified empire. That's a common misconception. It was a diverse civilization of highly complex, often rival city-states. And the collapse we're discussing, it was specific to the court centers in the South, mostly during the Terminal Classic period. And the consensus now is pretty clear. We're looking for a convergence of factors, not some single catastrophe.
Okay, so our mission today is to kind of follow that chain of logic. Trace how their incredible ingenuity peaked in the classic period, only to, well, maybe create environmental tipping points that just proved unsustainable in the long run.
Exactly. Let's start with scale. For decades, the sheer size of the Maya world was really underestimated, mainly because, well, the jungle just hid everything. It grew right over it.
But now we have tools like LiDAR, that is light detection and ranging. It essentially gives archaeologists X-ray vision from the air, right?
Yep.
Peeling back the canopy. So what does that tech reveal about the true scale, especially in the really early days?
It's revealed that the monumental scale started much, much earlier than we previously thought. Way back in the pre-classic period, we're now seeing these massive engineering feats like the megacity of El Mirador, its main structure, the Ladanta Pyramid Complex. It has a greater total volume than the Great Pyramid of Khufu in Egypt.
That comparison is just staggering. Really puts it in perspective. And think about the labor involved. They built Ladanta centuries before their supposed political peak, hauling, 2.8 million cubic meters of fill? Basket by basket?
Basket by basket. And crucially, without the wheel for transport, without draft animals, without metal tools.
That level of organized society, that ambition so early on, it's truly mind-blowing.
It is. But this immense ambition came with an immense sort of hidden cost. To produce the magnificent white stucco they used everywhere for those pyramids, facades, and especially the kilometers of bright white plaster floors and plazas, they needed huge quantities of lime powder.
Which requires fuel. Lots of fuel.
Exactly. Get this. To create just 1 ton of that essential lime powder mortar, they had to burn roughly 5 tons of wood.
Wait. 5 tons of wood for 1 ton of plaster? That resource consumption is astronomical. It sounds like they built their magnificent cities on a kind of deep early resource debt. Is that fair to say?
I think it's absolutely fair. That resource strain led to, well, the basically industrial scale deforestation and soil stress, certainly around the major centers. And it foreshadowed later crises. We actually see evidence of an environmental downturn and maybe some depopulation at El Mirador itself as only as 150 AD. So the Maya were already grappling with the demands of their own complexity centuries before the famous classic collapse.
Wow, okay. Yet, despite these foundational resource issues, the period from about 250 to 900 AD, that represents their political and intellectual apex, right? The classic period, we absolutely have to talk about their brilliance in maths and timekeeping.
Oh, absolutely. Their intellectual achievements really rivaled any in the ancient world. To take their mathematics, it was base 20 vigesimal. And crucially, they utilized the true concept of zero as a placeholder. That's foundational to modern computing, and incredibly rare in ancient systems.
And then there are those calendars, the interlocking ones. We hear about them all the time. But break it down for us. What are the basic components that made their system so complex?
Okay, so you're dealing with some sophisticated engineering of time itself. They operated primarily on 2 concurrent cycles. There's the 365-day solar year, the Hab, pretty standard. But then there's the 260-day ritual calendar, the Sulcan. Its origin is debated, maybe linked to the human gestation period, maybe agricultural cycles. And these 2 calendars, the Hab and the Sulcan, interlock like gears. They align every 52 years, creating what we call the calendar round.
And the purpose of all that complex celestial math wasn't just, abstract timekeeping. It was deeply political, deeply tied to power.
Precisely. Their astronomy wasn't just for casual stargazing. It was for divination and statecraft. power projection. For example, the highly detailed tracking of the movements of Venus, which they associated with a god of war, seems to have dictated the timing of major military campaigns.
Wow.
And we see this power manifest in their architecture, too. Think of the Kukulkan pyramid at Chichén Itzá Castillo. It's perfectly aligned to create that stunning shadow serpent descending the staircase during the solar equinoxes. That's political theater using cosmic alignments.
That kind of precision points to incredible social organization.
So if we step away from the star charts for a moment and look at the political landscape on the ground, how is this massive, complex society actually governed?
Well, it was governed largely by intense competition. You should think of it less like a single integrated empire and more like, say, Renaissance Italy, a network of fiercely competitive city-states, each ruled by its own Kualaja, a divine lord. And you had major players, regional hegemons like Tikal and Calakmul, their constant maneuvering, alliances, and warfare, often for captives, tribute, and control of trade routes, really dominated the political landscape for centuries.
And for the longest time, the narrative, the sort of popular image, held that this was a classic pyramid structure. A tiny, lavish elite at the top, and then this massive, impoverished peasant population at the bottom doing all the work. Is that picture accurate? You know, recent archaeology is really challenging that simplified view, especially findings from major sites like Caracol and Belize. Caracol was huge, maybe housed well over 150,000 people at its peak. And the archaeology there shows a surprisingly widespread distribution of sophisticated goods. Things like fancy polychrome ceramics, imported shell jewelry, even in what we would call non-elite residential structures, ordinary houses.
Okay, so not just palaces.
Not just palaces. It suggests a growing middle level, or maybe a middle class. Prosperous artisans, merchants, specialized farmers, townsfolk who enjoyed real access to wealth and complex goods. It wasn't just a two-tiered system.
That makes sense. Those hundreds of thousands of urban residents needed to be fed. How did a massive city like Caracol sustain itself in, well, what often looks like dense jungle?
They did it by essentially becoming garden cities. They use highly specialized agricultural techniques. We see extensive terracing on slopes, raised fields and canal systems in swampy areas. Chinampas are the more famous Aztec version, but the Maya had similar systems. And importantly, these intensive farming methods weren't just out in the distant countryside. They were often integrated within the urban and suburban areas. It was a managed landscape.
And it all revolved around
maize, mostly. The milpa system, that classic Mesoamerican triad of maize, beans, and squash grown together. Maize was everything, foundational. Their creation myth even says the gods formed the first humans from corn dough. They literally saw themselves as the corn people.
That deep connection, that reliance must extend to their economy too. We know their merchants traveled far, operating complex regional trade networks. What do they actually use for, like currency?
Well, the standard highly valued currency, especially in the classic period, seems to have been the cacao bean, the source of chocolate, of course.
Cacao beans is money.
Okay. Yes. Its importance meant it was likely controlled, regulated, but that didn't stop a bit of economic innovation, shall we say. We actually have archaeological evidence showing that even ancient economies had universal problems. People were counterfeiting cacao beans. They'd carefully empty the pods and stuff them with dirt or sometimes avocado rind to mimic the weight and feel.
No way. So they had currency fraud way back then. People literally stuffing dirt into their wallets or cacao pods.
Pretty much. It feels incredibly modern, doesn't it? But it highlights the complexity and the scale of their economy. It wasn't simple barter.
And this sophistication was tied closely to ritual life, wasn't it? You can't really separate the sacred from the secular.
Not at all. Religion permeated everything. Ancestors were incredibly important. They were often buried right under the floors of houses, keeping them physically close, part of the ongoing household. And those natural sinkholes, the cenotes, which were vital water sources, especially in the Yucatan, they were seen as sacred portals. Portals to the underworld, Gibalba, and the home of the powerful rain god, Cheak, vital for survival.
The intensity of their spiritual devotion is also visible in their practices around sacrifice. We hear about human sacrifice, often of high-status war captives, to nourish the gods.
Yes, that certainly happened. But rulers and elites also engaged in intense ritual self-mortification, auto-sacrifice. We have depictions and glyphic accounts of them piercing their own tongues, ears, even genitals to offer royal blood, considered the most potent sacrifice directly to the gods and ancestors. It was about maintaining cosmic order.
Okay, so weaving this together, you have intense warfare between city-states, these massive, ambitious building projects consuming resources, a complex political structure, and this deep reliance on a specific agricultural system.
All of those pressures, building over centuries, seem to have reached a breaking point during the Terminal Classic period, roughly, say, 800 to 1000 AD.
Right. This is where we really see the evidence stacking up for that multi-causal disaster converging. Let's start with the big one, the environmental stress, specifically drought. And we're not talking about just a bad year or two, are we?
No, not at all. We're talking about prolonged, intense megadroughts. The paleoclimate data, mainly from lake sediment cores and speleothems cave formations, is extremely robust on this point now. Studies have actually quantified the water loss. It suggests annual precipitation decreased somewhere between 41% and 54% on average during this key collapse period in the southern lowlands. And crucially, some peak drought conditions may have reached devastating reductions of up to 70% of normal rainfall, lasting for years, sometimes decades at a time.
70%.
Yeah.
That's crippling. And this is where that earlier point about resource use comes back, right? The genius of the classic period potentially turning into ecological self-sabotage.
The idea that the Maya didn't just passively experience a natural climate shift, they might have actually amplified it themselves. That synthesis is critical, and it's gained a lot of traction, supported by climate modeling, including work done by NASA. It indicates that the civilization's vast deforestation again, for agriculture, but also for fuel, especially for that never-ending stucco production. It seems to have made the regional climate measurably warmer and drier. When you remove that dense, dark, tropical canopy, the exposed ground reflects more sunlight back into the atmosphere. This changes air pressure, temperature gradients, and it can actually inhibit the formation of clouds and rain, especially during the crucial summer rainy season.
So they essentially cut down the very forests that help generate their rainfall. That's a devastating feedback loop.
It appears so. A human-amplified natural disaster.
Okay, so if rainfall reduction was that severe and potentially prolonged over decades, their ingenious water management systems must have been completely overwhelmed eventually.
They were, absolutely. Look at regions like the Puc Hills in the Yucatan. Cities like Cuic or Uxmal flourished there later, partly because they developed incredible water storage. These areas often had no access to permanent natural water sources like rivers or lakes. They relied entirely on massive, engineered, stucco-lined underground cisterns called chultuns. Some could hold thousands, even tens of thousands, of gallons of rainwater collected from plazas and roofs.
An incredibly smart solution for a seasonally dry environment. Adaptable.
Ingenious, yes, but ultimately fragile in the face of multi-year severe megadroughts. Even the best-designed rainwater harvesting system fails if the rain simply doesn't come for long enough. The chultuns would have run dry. And we see the crisis hitting suddenly in the archaeological record at some sites. Things like abruptly halted construction projects, walls left half-finished, tools dropped, maybe even scaffolding abandoned in place. It suggests that when the water failed, the end came quickly for some community.
People just had to leave.
They had no choice. When the chultuns failed in a city dependent on them, a population of tens of thousands might have only one option: mass migration, walking away.
And that environmental and resource shockwave must have combined with other stresses, amplifying them, really shattering the political system in the South. What else was making their civilization so brittle at this point?
Well, the historical records, the inscriptions on stelae, they point to escalating endemic warfare in the preceding centuries. It seems likely this intensified as resources like good land and water became scarcer. More competition, more conflict. We see evidence of political upheaval inscriptions boasting about the capture and perhaps sacrifice of rival lords. And significantly, the tradition of erecting dated stone monuments, the stelae that tell us so much, it wanes dramatically and then stops altogether in many southern cities during the 9th century. That's a clear sign the central courtly system was failing.
The institutions were breaking down.
Exactly. Add to that the sheer strain on the social structure, the declining returns on maintaining such complex political and ritual systems, and then you also have the possibility, harder to prove archaeologically, but likely of epidemic diseases. Things like acute diarrheal illnesses would thrive in disturbed tropical environments where populations were already stressed, malnourished, and potentially drinking contaminated water.
A perfect storm, really. A convergence of pressures.
That's the consensus view now.
Yeah.
Not one single cause, but a devastating convergence.
Okay, but it is absolutely essential to reiterate one key point for you, the listener, before we wrap this up. The term collapse is really misleading if you take it literally. The Maya civilization didn't vanish. The people didn't die out.
Absolutely not. That's probably the biggest myth we need to bust. The collapse was fundamentally a political and demographic restructuring. The specific model of divine kingship and the courtly centers in the southern lowlands failed, yes. The monuments fell silent there. But Maya people and culture persisted, adapted, and transformed. Power and population centers shifted, notably northwards into the Yucatan Peninsula, to cities like Chichén Itzá, then Uxmal, and later Mayapan. And these northern centers often developed different, perhaps more resilient governance structures, maybe more council-based rule, less focused on a single divine king, and often with a greater emphasis on trade networks.
And their resilience is just astonishing when you look at the longer history. The Spanish conquest, starting in the 16th century, it wasn't a swift takeover like with the Aztecs or Inca. It was difficult, protracted piecemeal.
Incredibly so. The last independent Maya kingdom, the Itzá polity based at Nochpeten on Lake Petén Itzá in Guatemala, didn't fall to the Spanish until 1697, nearly 2 centuries after Cortés arrived in Mexico.
Wow, 1697. That really underscores their persistence.
And the legacy today is vital and immediate. It's not ancient history in that sense. Today, there are over 7 million people, maybe more, who identify as Maya, living across Mexico and Central America. They speak 28 or more distinct Mayan languages. They carry on rich cultural heritages through traditional agriculture, incredible weaving practices, maintaining aspects of the old calendars in some communities, and often blending ancient beliefs with Catholicism in unique syncretic religious traditions.
So the emphasis has to be on continuity and agency, not disappearance.
Exactly. They endured, adapted, and are still here.
The story of the classic Maya, then, is, well, it's profound. They built these cities of almost unbelievable mathematical and architectural brilliance, reaching for the stars quite literally with their astronomy. But ultimately, the magnificent structure they created was deeply dependent on, you could argue, 2 non-negotiable elements down here on Earth: reliable water and the forest that provided fuel and ecological stability.
Their cities showed us, I think, the potential fragility of even the most complex societies when ecological pressures mount, especially when those pressures are amplified, consciously or unconsciously, by the society itself. When water, forests, and maybe internal trust falter, the grand courts can fail.
But the people adapt.
The people adapt and endure. And that forces us, inevitably, to look at our own era. We're facing unprecedented global climate strain, resource depletion, deforestation on a planetary scale. The Maya faced localized versions of these crises, driven by their own specific resource demands. We now face globalized versions. So the core question their story raises for us, I think, is this. What mechanisms of modern global industry, consumption, and environmental strain are currently testing the resilience of our own complex global structure? Are our own drums still sounding clear?
A truly powerful lesson etched in that jungle stone, something for us all to consider.
Indeed.
Thanks for listening. Stay curious, stay grounded, and stay tuned for the next one.